Kingsman stretches potentially across a century of adventures and stories, due to the in-universe origins of the group. Based on the Millarworld comic series The Secret Service by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons, the cinematic version of the group was introduced in Matthew Vaughn's 2014 film Kingsman, The Secret Service. Although that film was fairly self-contained, it opened up a world of colorful violence, deadly espionage, and the forces pulling at the society of the 20th and 21st centuries that have been explored across multiple films. The earliest establishing events for the organization occurred a full century before the events of the first film. Given the premise of the story, the group could theoretically appear in any other given era of human history. This makes the prospect of another Kingsman film all the more exciting, especially with Kingsman: Blue Blood on the way. This is the timeline of the most important events in the Kingsman film franchise in chronological order, going back to before the organization was even formed. The death of Emily Oxford, 1902. The first Kingsman scene chronologically. Orlando in the Kingsman. Orlando Oxford is established in the Kingsman as the founder of the Kingsman, but his story begins over a decade before the spy organization was ever established. Rather, Orlando's commitment to helping the world was present even from the first scene of the Kingsman working alongside the Red Cross during the events of the Second Boer War. Orlando and his wife Emily strive to set a good example for their son Conrad by helping others. In the chaos of an attack though, Orlando is shot in the leg and Emily is fatally wounded. Emily's death quietly sets the events of the Kingsman cinematic universe in motion. Her demise had a major impact on both Orlando and Conrad. Emily's dying request to Orlando, that he strive to keep Conrad away from war, would eventually spur Orlando to further focus on dealing with emergencies with as little overt violence as possible. Orlando's efforts to keep his son out of conflicts contrasted with Conrad striving to follow his mother's noble example, driving a wedge between the two in later years. Orlando Oxford combats the Shepherd's Conspiracy, 1914. The big goods and big bads of the Kingsman universe. Despite his decision to rely primarily on peaceful manners, Orlando increasingly found himself involved in global affairs during the events of the Kingsman. Alongside his family's butler Shola, Jimin Hunsu, and maid Polly, Gemma Arterton, Orlando used his wealth to establish a series of connections across the globe. This group would eventually remain by his side and become the original Kingsman alongside Orlando, setting up generations of spies. Their express intention was originally to intervene and prevent conflict from escalating. However, the machinations of a man initially only known as Shepherd pushed the world closer and closer to war. Although the Shepherd in this film is portrayed as a singular villain with a deliberate grievance to air, the concept is implied to be more everlasting in the film's mid-credits scene. In the same way that many people can serve the world as a Kingsman, there can be a Shepherd that can seek to sow chaos throughout the world. This leads to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and World War I beginning in earnest. Rasputin escou, 1916. Rasputin probably didn't dance fight to death in real life. The Kingsman Rasputin. Part of the appeal of exploring the Kingsman's period piece setting is getting to see how the Kingsman brushed up against historical events and people. If they'd been quietly preventing major events off-screen for decades by the events of the first film, there must be countless fun ways to tie the series into history. The Kingsman embraces this for all it's worth, having the heroes come up against historical figures like U.S. President Woodrow Wilson and supposed spy Mata Hari.